Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present today Sarah Mitchell, our Head of Documentation. Today, Sarah will be talking about cookies, rating them, writing them, maybe eating them, I don't know, but it's all based on a question that was sent in to us last week. And as a reminder, you can send questions to us anytime by sending an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com. Or during today's session, you can enter them into the questions window of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Hello, Sarah. Are you there?
I am here.
Excellent.
Wait. Oh, you unmuted me?
Okay.
Okay.
I've unmuted you. You are there. I can hear you. And
right.
I'm making you the presenter. So you click that dialog box and we'll see your screen.
All right. Will it let me? Which screen do you see?
I see one which has got a, looks like a command window on it.
Oh, I didn't want to share that.
All right. No one look at that screen.
Can you see this?
Is the one with the PowerPoint. That looks good. Yep.
All right. I apologize. I've never done a
multi-screen
demo with
Skype,
two screens running at the same time. So.
And now you have. Yeah.
Now I have. All right. Okay, cool. Well, actually, this makes it a little bit easier. Welcome. As Dave mentioned today, I'm just going to talk to you guys about something that getting asked a lot, and it's a topic that you should be more aware of, especially if you're building applications that communicate with the application server and you're deploying to PhoneGap. So, or not deploying to PhoneGap, but deploying to iOS and those types of platforms. So, in an application, there are times where you want to store some information in web applications, and this also applies to mobile in some cases, that the data needs to persist beyond the instance of that web page existing on the screen. And many of you are probably all familiar with these things I've listed here. This is stuff we've all talked about in the past. We've talked about session variables. They're variables that store on the server. They're stored in this object called context.session. It's something you interact with using XBasic, and it exists for the user's session, however long they're logged into your website, whenever that expires. So, and that is all stored up on the server. There are ways to send session data to the client, but by and large, this is information you track on the server, such as the currently logged in user is an example of a session variable that you may have used. Another way to pass information, particularly in web pages, is through the URL itself, and that's called a page variable. And what that is just this question mark is tacked onto the end of your URL, and then you have this key value pair format. So it's the name of your variable and the value that is in there. And if you have more of these, you can add them with ampersands. And then on the client side, you can actually store data directly in the JavaScript objects for like your UX component or top level JavaScript variables in the page itself. Caveat with those is that they may be deleted if the user refreshes the page, but it's a way to store some information for longer than the execution of an event. But there's another way, and that's cookies, delicious cookies. Cookies are something that's talked about a lot recently. Maybe you've heard of GDPR. Maybe you've seen those pop-ups on pages. We use your cookies, and here's how we use them. And they get a bad rap because they get abused a lot. But essentially, a cookie is just a packet of information. It's stored with every request that's sent and received for your web page. They're referred to as HTTP cookie. They're referred to as a web cookie, an internet cookie, a browser cookie. These are all the same things. It's just a small piece of information, and they can be very useful. We use them within Alpha Anywhere for doing stuff like initializing your first connection to our server. So there are two types of cookies. There's a persistent cookie, and there's a session cookie. I'll tell you right now, don't confuse session cookie with session variable like on the server. This is strictly a session in the browser. So like think of it as the duration of being on the site or having the web page open. So briefly touch on these in a little more detail. Persistent cookie, it's stored, it's permanent, it has an expiration date in the future, and it stays on the user's machine until it is either manually deleted by clearing out your cookie cache, or the cookie itself expires. You can't create a persistent cookie that doesn't have an expiration date. So keep that in mind. The other type of cookie I mentioned is a session cookie. It's temporary. It exists only for the duration that the user is on your site. So if they leave your site or if they close the browser, session cookies go away. They don't exist anymore. They're deleted. Session cookies don't have expiration dates. This is a key point I forgot to put on this slide. That's the big difference. Persistent cookie has an expiration date at some point in the future. Session cookies don't. So the browser says, I'm not going to keep this, and we'll remove it once the user is done with your site. So I'm going to jump straight into some examples here. In Alpha Anywhere, by and large, the way you're going to create cookies, read cookies, etc., is going to be using XBasic and using the context request and the context response objects. So this first example here that I've got on the screen is an example of reading a cookie. You will receive any existing cookies in the application when the request is sent to the server. And you can look at those cookies in the context.request object that's right here. And there are two important methods to know about. There's the hasCookie method, where you can say, hey, does this cookie exist? And then there's the getCookie method, which says, hey, give me this cookie. Now, the recommended way to try to access cookies is to first check if it exists and then call getCookie. If you do getCookie without checking if the cookie exists, it will return a null value if the cookie doesn't exist, but it is far easier to handle it like this than it is to check for a null value when the cookie comes back. So reading cookies, you may also want to add cookies. Cookies are added to a response object, which is the object that is sent back from the server at the end of the request. So context request is coming in from the user's client as the cookies in the packet when it comes in, and then context response is the data that gets sent back. If you don't modify any of the cookies, they will be automatically added to the response object. They will go back with the response, the ones that came in. They're always sent in and sent back with every request. But if you want to add them, you'll do that using context.response and the append cookie method. So I've got two examples here. This first one is a persistent cookie. Its name is persistent cookie. It is created as, my typo here, that shouldn't say C, that should say system web HTTP cookie. But that is it's dim cookie as system web HTTP cookie equals new system web HTTP cookie name. This is a .NET object. Cookies, the whole everything in there in Alpha Anywhere is basically done using the .NET cookie framework. So if you have any questions about these cookie objects, we have some documentation about it in the doc, which I'll share with you towards the end of this presentation. But for really detailed things, we don't duplicate everything Microsoft has done, so you'll want to refer to that. But after you've created your cookie, you'll want to set the data in it. So for my persistent cookie, I want to say it expires on today plus 30 days. So in 30 days, I've set its value to this is a persistent cookie. I've also assigned HttpOnly equals true. What that means is that this cookie can only be accessed on the server. You can't access it through JavaScript on the client. This helps mitigate some cross-site scripting attacks. We'll talk about it a little bit later. The second example down here, well, I create it and then add it using append cookie. The second example, this is a session cookie. It's my session cookie, created the same way. Assign it HttpOnly so that people who are running JavaScript don't access it, or tells the browser don't let them access it. And then I give it a value. I don't set expires. Because I didn't set expires, this will be added as a session cookie. It will only exist until the user leaves my website. And the process of updating cookies is the same. You use append cookie. You could choose to read the cookie out of the context object first, or the context request object first, and then change it, or you can just create a new one with the same name and add it. It will overwrite it. And then finally, the third operation you may want to do is deleting of cookies. Cookies are only ever deleted manually by the user or deleted automatically by the browser. There isn't a way to say, hey, delete this cookie explicitly using the context request or context response object. The only way you can get a cookie deleted is to set its expiration date to a date in the past. So in this example, I set it to today minus one, so yesterday. What this will do is it'll update the cookie. It'll set its expiration date to yesterday. And the next time the browser goes and looks at that cookie, it will delete it. It'll say, oh, this is expired, and it will remove it. It's not necessarily up to you when that happens. So you do need to let the browser control that a little bit. But this is what you need to do if you've got a cookie you want to clear it out. So I had mentioned HttpOnly. The value of true means the cookie cannot be accessed on the client, so no one can read it with JavaScript. You could set it to false, and then you could access the cookie on the client with JavaScript. But that also exposes you to possible cross-site scripting issues where other sites could access your cookies, particularly persistent cookies, and set that value to a script or something, and then you accidentally, unknowingly execute that script the next time you access the cookie. So it's always recommended to set it to true to make sure that you're ensuring some level of security on access of your cookies for your site. We always set all of our cookies to HttpOnly to our stuff on our session cookies that track a few things like settings.
Could you explain that exploit just a little bit more? Is it a case that you then go to another website and that website has got some malicious JavaScript code which says what was the last page that was accessed and can I see the cookies in there? Is that sort of the deal, or is it?
Well, the maliciousness is that someone could access the cookie if you've said that anyone could access it, and they could insert a script in there that would get executed during the request back to your server. So I've got a link to a site that explains it really, really well. I've read through it a few times. I'm still trying to grasp that whole cross-site scripting problem, but like the core of the issue is that you can insert executable code into the cookie and then it executes. You don't want that. So this helps mitigate it. It doesn't prevent it 100%, but it is one thing that you can do to try to keep your site safe. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't have an example totally here, is SameSite Policy. This is new. You're going to see this phrase in our release notes. Recently, browsers started requiring a SameSite policy on cookies. And then if you don't have one, then they decide for you what that cookie policy is. And the SameSite policy is the behavior of sharing cookies between sites. So how a cookie can be shared to a third service. Some third-party services require cookies to use them. The payment systems are a common example where you put some secure information in a cookie and then you call into the payment system and they read it out of the cookie and finish the processing off your site. If you don't set it, it has a value one set, it's not set at all, it's not sent with the cookie. The browser is going to pick for you what that policy is, and most browsers will use lax. Mobile devices will use none without the requirement of SSL. So before any of this was enforced, kind of. But unset, it's just going to behave as the browser decides, which may lead to unexpected behavior. Integrations with some third-party services might stop working. You might see interesting errors in your output because you don't have a policy set on that cookie that allows it to be sent to the third-party site. Setting the policy, there's 3 values currently that you can choose from: none, lax, and strict. None means share all cookies at third-party sites. If the cookies policy, SameSite policy is none, you must be using SSL, TLS. Your site has to be running securely. It has to be an HTTPS site. that is a requirement. I don't think it's a bad requirement. There are a lot of ways to get free SSL certs now out there. Let's Encrypt is a good site where you can get one. And the whole of the internet is moving in this direction of doing all communications over HTTPS. The other two options, lax, means some cookies can be set to top-level GET requests on third-party sites. And then strict is no cookies. They are not sent at all to third-party sites. I'm not sending them out. If you are developing mobile applications on iOS and possibly Android, you have to set this policy. You need to set it to none or unset. And this isn't necessarily on the cookies itself, but in your application server configuration. Right now on IIS, it is defaulting to lax. So you need to go in there and set it to none or unset if you want PhoneGap apps to be able to communicate with the application server. And that's because the session cookies we use for initializing the first communications with our server and some other stuff that we just store briefly, like your session ID and that kind of stuff, that information will not be sent to the server unless you set this up. So if you don't set it, then the app will view the application server as a third-party site, and it won't send the cookies, and nothing will work. So you got to do this. You got to, at least at a minimum, try unset. If that's not working, try none. So something to keep in mind for app developers out there. So before I get into cookie laws, were there any questions on the stuff we just touched on?
Yeah, so here's a question. So you're talking about cookies being read back by the server, but is it possible to read a cookie in a disconnected application using PhoneGap?
If they're already on this, if they're already on the application, probably that would be set on the client though. You'd be viewing the cookie on the client side, so that would be through JavaScript.
Through JavaScript, right? So
you'd have to allow access to the cookie on the client, which goes back to that HttpOnly setting.
So you could do it, but it could open you up to cross-site scripting, and you're going to give us a link on that danger a little later on.
Perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yep.
So
thank you. Yeah, that's the question.
This is my guess. Don't hold me to that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because all these examples that we're going to give, and we're going to get to later, they're all done on the server. They're all done through Rackspace.
And someone points out, as they always do, under strict, there's a lot of O's in that word cookies there. So.
Cookies. There are a lot of O's. I don't know if you noticed, there were some typos on a few slides earlier as well. So.
Well, that's right. Keep the.
I'll fix those.
Keep the proofreading going. Yes.
Yeah.
Can we get a copy of these slides? Someone else has asked that. Can we get a copy of these slides?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So if you do want a copy of these slides after today, you can send an email to, or later on today, send an email to guides, GUIDES@alphasoftware.com, and we'll be happy to get it.
And nothing that I'm sharing in these slides isn't already documented on our site. So in a way, the slides are kind of more reference for me. But yeah, there's definitely, I'll tighten those up. I'll fix these typos too. Like that. So as mentioned early on, GDPR, there's just something called cookie laws. The regulations around cookies. If you're going to use cookies, you need to be aware of these laws, what they are, and when you need to provide consent, when you need to track, and when you need to make sure you're not creating cookies when you shouldn't. This is going to be dependent on the countries you publish your site in and what kind of restrictions apply. They are regulated. They've been regulated for a while now. GDPR came after the first cookie laws ever came out. But what cookie laws and regulations really are trying to do is that you are to make sure that users of your site are fully aware when you are using cookies to track information about them, about their usage, where they're going, where they're coming from. When you're storing cookies, a persistent cookie, when you're tracking them long term. So any cookies you use, you should always notify users that you're using cookies. There are types of cookies that are exempt from the consent. If you say, is it okay to use cookies, don't use cookies. Some types of cookies are exempt from that. Session cookies are a type of cookie that are often exempt from some of these restrictions because they are actually required for your site to function well. An example is in Alpha Anywhere, we use a cookie to set up your session ID, so we know which session corresponds to the user who's using the site. Without that cookie, your session would be recreated every single time you did anything, and that's going to lead to a poor user experience unless you manage to create a site that doesn't require tracking anything on the session on the back end. So I recommend to everyone here, if you're going to use cookies, that you research this. I'm not a lawyer. I've read a lot about this. I think I understand it. At the end of the day, you need to do your due diligence. So just keep this in mind if you're going to use cookies. So just wanted to make sure you guys are aware of that. And then I want to do a live demo. So we're going to go to the kitchen now, and I've prepared several meal-raised and cooking ingredients.
All right.
So let me go here. I'm going to just briefly set up a new project. Should have done this before, but let's make a new workspace.
So right now I still just see your PowerPoint screen.
Yes, that's on purpose.
Okay. I want to make sure.
It's on purpose for a reason this time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Escape out of that.
Okay.
Just wanted to set up this project.
All right.
And all files, the new blank project, I just made it. I'm going to make it a Git repository so that I can push this up to GitHub later along with my slides. So that Dave only has to send one thing out. So all these examples we're going to do, we're just going to do a simple basic A5W page. An A5W page is an Alpha Anywhere web page. It says A5 in it because the product used to be called Alpha 5, and then the W stands for web. So this is our special web page that can be used to add XBasic and stuff that gets processed by a server and then serves up your HTML and CSS to the end user. So I'm going to select A5W pages. I'm going to click New. And this is going to automatically create a new A5W page for me. It's going to open it in the HTML editor. And the first time this opens, and possibly every time afterwards, you may be in the what you see is what you get tab. I highly recommend you click over on source because it's extremely rare that the WYSIWYG tab is going to provide enough power for what you need to do. So this is the default page that is generated. You notice it looks like an HTML page because it's an HTML page with one special tag. It's our tag. It's the %A5 closing % tag, similar to how you would write PHP. But what this tag does is allow you to insert XBasic into the page. That XBasic is then processed by the application server into whatever HTML output it generates before it is sent. And we're going to use this to do some cookies, do some cookie stuff. I'm going to pull up my cheat page over here where you can't see it. So, first example that I wanted to share with you is just creating a cookie. It's done using a pen cookie, and it's done using the context response object. So we're going to create our new cookie, and we're going to give it a name. Call it my cookie. I'm going to create a new cookie, a new system web HTTP cookie. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to say new system. Oh, there we go. Web HTTP cookie. This constructor takes two inputs. You can either give it the name of your cookie, or if you already know what the value is, you can give it the name as the first parameter and the value as the second parameter. For simplicity's sake, we're just going to give it the name here. And we'll set the value separately. So this line will create the new cookie. Just as a point of interest, if you do something like dim cookie as system web cookie and you don't have equals new system web cookie, or you don't assign it the result of get cookie, you will get an XBasic error. And that's because this object right here can't exist without it being initialized to some value. So you have to give it either a new cookie or assign it an existing cookie in the system. All right, so the cookie has a number of properties I can set here. They're all listed after when you type dot. So you have HttpOnly, you've got the value in here. You do have access to the name if you wanted to set it this way. But because you are required to pass it in when you create it, it's not likely you're going to be using that very often when you first create your cookie. You have expires. And there's some other stuff in here that you can go and look at on Microsoft's website to see more information about it. It's less commonly used. So, but we're going to set HttpOnly to true. I'm going to give it an expiration date of tomorrow. What was the third thing? Value. I got to give it a value. The value, this is my cookie. And then down here, we will say context response end cookie. So this will create a cookie. We'll add the response. And when this page is sent back to the client, that cookie will be added into the browser. So let's save this. I'm going to call this page add cookie. And let's go publish it and try it out in the browser. So I'm going to do this real quick. I'm going to add this to my message. Close. So that is now saved. So let's publish. Publish settings, local web root. I do want to put this in a different target folder. I'm going to call it cookies. I don't want it just dumped in the root. It can get confusing there. And let's call the default cookie or default page add cookie. Web root, everything else is fine. Let's publish. Click OK. Yes, I would like to create that folder. Wait for it to generate. And then I'm going to start the development server because local web root runs in the development server. And I'm going to select this publish local and open. It'll publish it again, but this is the fastest way to get the page open. And then this is what the page looks like. And you may notice there's nothing here. And that's because the cookies aren't up front. They're back in the system somewhere. So let's go check that out. And let's copy this. Let's go use Chrome and not Internet Explorer. So I'm a little more familiar with this one. Go to our site. Let's look at our developer tools. And then I'm going to expand this and make it really big so that I can explain what this is. If you've never opened this before, you'll probably be on the Elements tab. This is just the HTML that's in your page here. But up across the top here is a whole bunch of different things you can look at for your website. And if you go all the way over to application and you look inside storage and you select cookies and then your site, you can see the cookies that are associated with your site. So what you should see here, and I'm hoping the font is not too small, are two cookies. The first one is the cookie we made, and the second one is your Alpha Anywhere session ID. And I wanted to point out some things here so you kind of know what this is. Expand on, I don't know if there's anything there. Okay, so when you're in here looking at your cookies, you've got several columns here. The name of your cookie, you've got the value. The domain is the domain. It's this thing up here. It's the site you're on, who owns it. And then this column, this expires max age thing, it has a value here. For my cookie, it's tomorrow. But this one over here says session. And it says session because this is a session cookie. It has no expiration date. It will be deleted when I close this browser and leave this site. So when you're in here looking at this, that's how you can tell the difference between a persistent cookie and a session cookie. Persistent cookie is going to have a date timestamp here, and your session cookies are just going to say session. And there's also a little checkbox column here. It says HttpOnly, so you can see which site, which cookies do allow access through JavaScript on the service, the web page. And then also over here, SameSite Policy. This cookie here, this session ID is set to strict. It means it cannot be sent to any third-party site. It can only be used by this site, Sarah 2019 or 1580. So that's good. We don't want that cookie to be shared. It should stick with our site. So this is where you see all your cookies. Other browsers have other tools for doing similar access into cookies. Internet Explorer / Edge has it. Firefox has it. I do believe Opera. All the other ones have them. This is where you can go to look at your cookies. Do you have any questions about this particular looking into the application stuff to find your cookies?
No questions so far.
Okay. So sometimes you may, if you get like messages in the console here about some cookie having a bad policy, you can go over here to application and dig down into cookies and actually find it. And then you can see like whose cookie is it. I know for a brief while there, Google Analytics wasn't setting the SameSite policy on their cookies, and that was producing warnings. And it's on them to do that, but it was nice to be able to come here and say, oh, it's not me, it's this third-party service I'm using. They need to update their SameSite policy. So I knew who to go to get help with that problem. So this is very, very useful when you're trying to diagnose cookie issues. So that's creating a cookie. Let's go read the cookie. So I'm gonna make a new page. Since we know that cookie is persistent until tomorrow, we can make a new page to read it.
Hey, Sarah, at this point, I'd like to point out that quite a few developers do in fact prefer when they open up the editor to go directly into the WYSIWYG mode rather than the source mode. And I believe there is a setting that you can get to under File Settings, which allows you to choose the default state of that editor.
To stay in WYSIWYG mode?
It is. Oh, did you not know? I knew something you didn't. This has never happened before. I'm glad I had all these people as witnesses.
I think you misspoke. I think you meant most people like to go into source and not WYSIWYG.
I've seen, yeah, sorry. Most people want to go into source and not WYSIWYG. Okay, yeah, that part is true.
There is a setting to set that.
Do you want to just show off that setting real quick?
I can show you, yeah. So settings in the developer IDE are found under the view menu. Down here at the bottom, settings. And if you go over to system, references, HTML editor, default tab. The default is not set. You can pick source if that's what you prefer. And then you click OK and you're done. So next time I open this, it'll automatically open source tab.
And one reason you might also want to do that, at least I found, is that sometimes WYSIWYG ends up reformatting some stuff that I put into source code, and I put it in that way for a particular reason, and I go back into source code and say, oh, it's all messed up. The line breaks aren't where I want it to be and stuff. So sometimes it's best just to keep out of WYSIWYG. It's good for certain things. I mean, it does actually work as a WYSIWYG editor, but when you're doing more programming types things, source is where it's at.
Yeah, and I would also like to mention that if WYSIWYG is mangling your source code, basically doing that, let us know so we can fix it.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
So yeah, let's move on to reading cookies. Go back to my cheat sheet. It's the documentation. So reading cookies, a little bit different. It uses the request object instead of the response object. Now, because cookies are in both the request and the response, you could, in theory, use the response object to read the cookie. But it's easier to think about reading it from the request because that's what was sent to you. So I'm going to create a new cookie as C equals, what did we name our cookie? We named it my cookie. I'm just going to copy that first. And I'm going to make that A5 so it's correct. So I'm going to say dim cookie name as C, and I'm going to say if context.request has cookie name, then else. In my else case, I'm going to say there is no cookie named plus cookie name. And then up here, I'm going to do the part where I get the cookie and then print it. So this is the name of cookie I want to get. I'm going to ask the context request object, hey, do you have this cookie? It's either going to return a true or false value. If it returns true, then it's going to execute all the code we're going to put in this statement next. If it returns false or any other value, it's going to execute this else condition. And in this else condition, what this is going to do is it's going to use the question mark operator to output HTML into the A5W page. And this is the HTML that it's going to print on the page. And then that will be sent back to the client and displayed. And what it's going to print is there is no cookie named, single quote, the name of my cookie, closing single quote, and BR. So up here, because my cookie does exist, I would like to get it. So I'm going to say dim cookie as system web HTTP cookie equals context.request get cookie name. And so what this does is it initializes a system web HTTP cookie to the cookie that is returned from here. If I do this and the cookie doesn't exist, it's going to return null. The behavior you get here is going to be partially unpredictable. So I do recommend that you make sure your cookie exists before you try to get it. And that's just because initializing this to a null value, it doesn't know what to do when the system the XBasic gets upset at you about that. So if it does exist, what I want to do is I want to print that value of the cookie. So we're going to go here and we're going to say the cookie exists. BR. And on the next line, we're going to say cookie's value is plus, and then cookie dot value. And that's what we're going to do.
Can I interrupt you there just for a second? There
Yes.
was a question which had to do with cookie dot, and there's value and there's values. So do you know, can you know the difference offhand, or
So yeah, I do know the difference. A cookie can store like a single value, or it can store like a collection of name value pairs, and that's what the values is used for.
Oh, I see.
Not,
Okay.
yeah, it's I can give you guys a link to the cookie documentation. You can go look at HTTP cookie and see how that works.
Great.
It's a little
Thank
more
you.
complex, but yeah, that's the difference between the two.
Thanks.
Yep. So if this has my cookie and it exists, I'm going to get the cookie. I'm going to say the cookie exists, and I'm going to print its value. And that's it. That's this whole page. So let's save it. And let's go over here and let's add it to our Git repository. Just that guy, not the project settings. Reading cookies example. Okay. And then let's publish it to the local web group. And let's go look at it. So that page is called read cookies. So this is add cookie. This is the page that added the cookie. Let's go look at read. Oh, it's not found. Oh, did I call it read cookies? Yes, I did. There's an S. There we go. Read cookies. The cookie exists. The cookie's value is, this is my cookie. There we go. That's how you can read a cookie. You can also list all the cookies that are in a state if that's something you want to do. But that's how you get the value out. And I would pause if there are questions. I feel like maybe this was pretty straightforward and you guys followed me on that one.
No question on cookies, although we do have a general question which has to do with making a project startup with web projects selected, if there's a way to do that instead of having the control panel selected when you first launch.
There is. We can talk about that after.
But we'll get to that at the end.
Yeah,
all right,
we'll
thanks.
get to the end. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's do one more. Let's do one more example. And let's delete our cookie. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to copy these first three. Well, you know what? I'm going to copy this whole thing. I'm going to take it over here. Because what I want to do is I want to check if that cookie exists. And then I want to expire it so it gets deleted. So, save this page. You know what? Let's call it expire cookie. All right. So in this case, if this cookie exists, I want to update it. And I want to set the expiration date to yesterday. So it's deleted the next time the browser accesses. So similar approach. This is my cookie name. I'm check if it exists. If it exists, I'm going to get it. And I'm going to set several properties on it. First, I'm going to set HttpOnly equals true. Because in my experimentation with this, that for some reason gets set to false if you add it again and you don't explicitly set it. And then the browser can access it. So I'm going to set that to true, and I'm going to say cookie.expires equals add days now -1, meaning yesterday. And then I'm going to say context response append a cookie. So, assuming I've done this right, I'm going to publish this page, and the first time it runs, we won't see any output because the cookie exists. But the second time we run it, we should see there is no cookie named cookie. So let's publish it and see what happens. We call that expire cookie 1N, no S. So first time it ran, there was no output because we found the cookie and we set the expiration on it. And if you look over on the right-hand side there, you'll see it's not listed anymore because when the browser saw that it had an expiration that has already passed, it deleted it. So now I want to reload this page. We'll get there is no cookie named my cookie. And so that's how you can get rid of a cookie. Those are 3 very basic examples. Creating your cookie, reading the cookie, and then removing the cookie if you don't want it anymore. Good.
Very cool.
Yeah. So this is Sarah's crash course of cookies. There's a lot more we could do with this, but I'm gonna stop here and take the remainder of your questions.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so the first question, the person who asked it did figure it out, but for the rest of us, when you open up that project, how do you get right to just to make sure I understand the question, the web projects control, hang on.
They want to see this view.
Yeah, they want to see yeah, exactly. They don't want to see the other view. Yep.
Yeah. So there was a dialog that used to open up that asked me how I wanted to open my projects, and I clicked the never annoy me again button.
Sure.
But the first time you create a web project, it'll ask you, do you want to open the control panel or the web projects control panel?
Yeah.
Open on the web projects control panel. There's a way to set it permanently. I am not 100% sure off the top of my head if that's something stored in project properties
yeah,
or somewhere else. I wish there was a search feature.
You go to File, Workspace Properties. So back in the control panel. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, back in the control panel.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, File, Workspace Properties.
Yep.
Control panel went open. There it is. Web Applications Control. Okay, that's how you do it. Thank you for the hint. Okay, but it'll open the web projects. If you're building web and mobile apps, you should always be on the Web Applications Control panel. There should be no reason you ever need to come over here other than to check that box.
Exactly.
Just changed.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks for the person who both asked and answered that question. That is a very useful one if you forgot to check that. So the other question that we have has to do just generally with PhoneGap. They're saying, what is the future of PhoneGap? Oddly, we were having a discussion about that just this morning. In fact, we talk about it almost every day. So PhoneGap, as you may know, is basically a collection of plugins that work with iOS and Android and allow you to build HTML apps that do things that HTML apps aren't usually allowed to do, like access the file system or the accelerometer or run a SQLite database on the phone or things like that. And that's because they're actually, these plugins are written in native code, but they're accessed by the HTML5 applications that you actually create in Alpha Anywhere. Now, built into that is, into Alpha Anywhere currently, is a service called PhoneGap Build. PhoneGap Build is different than PhoneGap. They are separate. So PhoneGap is this collection of software and plugins and is an open source project that we plan to keep using for quite a while to come. PhoneGap Build was a simple way of taking those PhoneGap plugins and your HTML5 application and wrapping them together into a single application. And typically that was a multi-step process that you would have to do either on the command line, and in some cases you might need to use a Mac depending on the publishing profile, publishing certificates, but we'll get into that in a minute. But that PhoneGap Build is no longer being kept up to date. It still exists, but so anything you build going forward, you're not going to get it into the Apple Store or even the Android Store in many cases. So what we have done is we've come up with a couple of solutions for that. One is we've come up with directions for doing a client-side build. That's where you build the project yourself on your own computer. And the other thing is we've been looking into, and I believe documented, a process using a company called Ionix software and service in order to build those applications as well. Those are going to be our final solutions to this problem because they're still a little bit more technical. I mean, the PhoneGap Build was cool because you just pressed a few buttons and it would end up spitting out your application. This new one, there's quite a few steps that you have to go through, and it's something that we're not entirely happy with. So we can absolutely, if you need to get something into the Google or Apple iOS store, contact us at guides@alphasoftware.com. We can point you to the documentation exactly how to do that. But going into the future, we want to make that process simpler than it is today. So that's for the PhoneGap Build. PhoneGap itself, also known as Cordova, is still a active and going concern and something we continue to use. So thank you very much for that question. If you do have questions further about that, again, guides@alphasoftware.com, and we'd be happy to help you out. So I'm taking a look through and I'm seeing, are there any new questions? There aren't, although one person at the beginning said, how do I get, I would like to sign up again for this series of webinars and make sure that I get put on the list, or I have a friend I'd like to get signed up for the series of webinars. I put that into the chat window, both the weekly Alpha Anywhere overview webinars, as well as the weekly Transform Tuesday webinars. If you're interested in that, you'll find those in the chat window for signing up. Let's see, do we have any other questions? It doesn't look like it.
All right.
Hang on.
If there's no more questions, we will show you how to make this into a GitHub repository.
Oh yeah, what was that?
If no one has any more questions, we can convert this to a GitHub repository.
Fantastic. Do you want to talk a little bit about GitHub and how it works with our project?
I do.
Fantastic.
All right.
You're one of the biggest proponents of GitHub. Before
I love
source
control.
We used to not have source control. That meant when we were working on projects, we would take our components and like email them to each other or put them up on Dropbox or something like that. But that didn't let us roll back in time or anything like that if we ended up making a mistake. So, and that's just one of the benefits to GitHub. So I'll let you take it away. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to share my GitHub repository with you guys. Please don't laugh at my tubing repository about YouTube. But this is my account on GitHub. I love using source control. I love it because I can save all my code at some point in time. It tracks the differences, and then I can move forward and make changes. And if I like those changes, I can check them in again. If I don't like them, I can undo everything back to the last time I saved it. If I check it in and I'm like, oh no, I broke everything, I can undo it and go back to the last time it worked. So I love it. We've integrated it, Git at least into Alpha Anywhere to try to make it easy to convert your projects into Git repositories so you can have all the wonderful things that source control gives you. And as I've been doing this demo, you guys may have noticed that I've been clicking this red button up here, and that's our Git menu. That's the menu you use to convert your project into a Git repository. I'm saying project because it's the web project within the workspace. It's not the whole of the workspace that is a Git repository. It's just the project. So this says default up here. I only have one project here right now. If I added a new project, it would ask me if I want to make a new one. If I wanted to make a new one for my GitHub repository, if I want to convert it to a Git repository. So you can have multiple projects, all different Git repositories in your workspace, but it is tied to the project and not the whole workspace. So what I wanted to show here is how you take this local Git repository that I created pretty early on and can push it all up into GitHub so that I can share it widely with everyone. So to do that, what I have to do first is make a new GitHub repository. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to call this GitHub. Demos, Q&A, Webcast on July 22nd, 2020. There we go. Say it's public. If you don't want your repository to be public, you can make it private. You have free unlimited repositories that are private now on GitHub. It used to be a paid service. And I believe you can have up to like 5 collaborators or something on it. So you don't want to share your code with the world. You can keep it to yourself. But I'm gonna make it public. I'm not gonna initialize it with the README because I already have a bunch of code I want to add into here. And I don't want to do a merge right off the bat. So I'm going to click create repository. This will create a new repository. And now that I'm here, I can now connect this to my Alpha Anywhere Git repo that is local on my machine. And to do that, I need either this link here, or I believe this link here, but this one's easier to find. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to Alpha Anywhere. I'm going to go to Git settings. I'm going to say register change remote GitHub repository. It's going to tell me I have to enter my username and password first, and I'm going to go, oh yeah. So I'm going to save my username, user ID, and password for GitHub here into the Git settings menu. I'm going to put it over here so you can't see where it is. I'm joking. Password is encrypted, so you actually can't see it. I'll put it back here.
Fair enough. Oh, it's all asterisks.
It's all asterisks. My whole password. Now you know. So now that I've done that, I can say register change remote. I'm going to paste that URL in that I copied from GitHub. I'm going to click OK. And assuming I have done everything correctly, I'm going to first click poll to verify that it worked. And this looks like it did not work. There's no tracking information. In that case, I'm going to press push and see what happens. It worked. So it worked. The success. Okay. So I'm 100% sure what that meant. I think it meant that my GitHub repository on the internet was totally empty. Now if I reload this, you should be able to see that. And this is everything that we did today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this public repository URL again. I'm going to put it in the chat window so you guys can go and you can pull that down directly into Alpha Anywhere. Let's go do that. Let's make another project. File, new project, project name, cookie demos. I'm going to create it from a GitHub repository. I'm going to say that URL. And here's a really cool thing, guys. Because I made that a public repository, you don't need to have a GitHub account to pull this stuff down. You only need to specify a username and password if you're pulling from a private repository. So this is literally all you need to do. And then you click OK. It's going to clone the repository down. And now you'll have all those files locally.
Cool. Excellent. Let's see. Yeah, definitely a few people saying that they like GitHub and that they're using it there.
There are other solutions out there. Git is not the only one.
Yep.
But it's the one we've chosen to integrate with.
Right. Let's see what else I've got here. Someone is reporting, oh, someone is asking, is there going to be a new version of Alpha Anywhere, production version coming out pretty soon?
No, never.
I believe that the threat was this week, but if it isn't this week, it's probably going to be next week.
Yeah, so we're really close. And we're
It's
just
imminent. We're doing squishing bugs.
Yeah. We thought we were really close a couple weeks ago, but we just got one more issue to iron out, and once that's done, it's going out. So we're hoping soon, but soon could still be a week or two away.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. Another question for you. Let's say there's some stuff in my project that I don't want to push up to the GitHub repository. Can I just say forget it? I don't want this up. Maybe I've got personal notes or something on my computer or something in that directory.
For sure.
Okay.
Let's show an example of that here.
Great.
Let's go back in my default project. You may notice there's some like yellow files down here that are like project security settings or whatever. I don't want to commit last selected profile to GitHub. That was my last selected profile, not my coworkers. Right. So what you can do here is you can right click on it and say add to the ignore list and say last selected profile, and that will update the git ignore. And what git ignore says is any of the files, folders, or files or folders that match the following patterns that are in this list shall be ignored. Mm-hmm. So once you've added it, you need to make sure to commit your ignore file, but that's all you really need to do. Now, if you accidentally commit something that you want to change your mind and actually like not ignore it, or if you've committed things that you don't want in there, there are ways to pull them back out and update it all. It's a little involved because you have to like delete it from the repository, commit it, add it back in, and then ignore it. But it's doable.
Excellent. Let's see, just unrelated, but someone said they are having a problem with the current version doing a export to Excel. And so I've asked them to send actually their request to guides@alphasoftware.com so we can take a look at that and make sure that we did not break anything. And if we did, we'll get it working for us and get it working for them. Let's see a bunch of questions here so we can get to. Can you handle branches in GitHub with Alpha Anywhere?
Currently, no, not directly.
Okay. All right.
Let me double check Git settings. No, we don't directly handle it just now. You can customize the push and pull repositories commands, which I think might be a way you can handle that. This is pretty basic. For anything more advanced, or if you need something that gives you a lot more access to a lot more things, you could use the GitHub desktop tool, which is actually a tool that is currently required as part of Ionic app flow integration process to get stuff up. And that's available on GitHub's website. And it's a decent tool. It does things pretty good.
Fantastic. And just a quick clarification about the PhoneGap stuff. Well, PhoneGap build is falling out of date. We're not pulling that feature out of the software immediately because it still actually has got some value. It's a little technical for building your APK files, which you can then use in other processes. So that's not disappearing because we know it currently does have some value, even though we're probably not suggesting going forward that you rely on PhoneGap build for very much beyond that.
Yeah, you can still build Android apps with it.
Yes. And let me see if there are any other questions here. None that I think we can handle in the 30 seconds that are remaining. But hey, thanks very much, everyone, for showing up. Sarah, thank you very much for presenting. And thank all of you who attended and asked questions. If you do have further questions, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, @alphasoftware.com. Thanks again for attending. We hope to see you next week. Take care and be well. Bye-bye.